Thank you very much. Welcome back, everybody. And I think I've just been introduced, so I'll crack on. There's quite a lot to get through. So I shall just blast through these slides. Or will I?
Here.
Okay. So as I've just been introduced, we've been working with my partner, Shani, on behalf of our partners, Wester Ross Fisheries Trust and the NTS, across Wester Ross, primarily in the control of Rhododendron ponticum, which you know quite a lot about now. We've been working through the River Ewe, River Kerry catchments and around Torridon. And as you can see from that map, they seem to be, the rhododendrons, the typical infestation tends to be centred around small settlements, particularly where there's been a big house, hotel, or some on the grounds, and you get these discrete infestations with quite big rhododendron forests that they're turning into in these small areas, and you'll get more scattered bushes and seedlings that are scattered along the road, as you can see there, going up between Kinloch Ewe and Gairloch and Pool Ewe. So the way we control these is people like us, the contractors, will go in and hit one at a time, hit these big infestations. And it's good to get the community involved, and it's a good task for volunteers to fill in the gaps, as it were, as we move through there. And our ultimate aim is, of course, catchment and then landscape scale eradication. So we've heard a lot about strategy and the problem with the invasive species. And so what I really wanted to talk to briefly is about what we actually do when we're confronted with something that looks like this, and what we're actually doing on the ground and the control techniques that we're using. So we've got a toolkit that's been developed over years. There's been a lot of hard work by an awful lot of people over decades now. And as we've heard, a lot of control programs have been ultimately not successful as we'd hoped, but this is more to do with resources, follow-up and how it's coordinated and taking this strategically. But I'll just talk now about what we're actually doing when we get down into the woods. It's like a worm's eye view of control. And so this is a typical rhododendron plant. It's a nice small one, but it's like most plants, it'll have a little stem, branches and some leaves. And in order to control this, there's two sort of approaches. You can either try and grub the entire thing out, just dig it up, roots and all, and get rid of it that way. Or you could introduce a herbicide, and the one we use is glyphosate. And then the trick with that is to get it distributed throughout the whole plant, roots, branches, the stem and the leaves. So rhododendrons spread in several ways. They'll seed out. A medium-sized bush can produce up to 1 million seeds. And this pattern of infestation, you can see this is down from Torridon. You can see the houses in the background where people have had rhododendron hedges, shelter belts, ornamental plants. And these are continually seeding out up onto the heath above and spreading out as seedlings. And eventually that will fill in and turn into quite a big rhododendron infestation if it's left. They'll also lay, they'll push out lateral branches, and where these touch the floor, they will reroot. And so it creeps along the ground. It's quite a slow infestation, but it's pretty relentless. It also presents us with a problem, if we are using chemical, of making sure that that chemical is distributed to the whole plant, including these layers. They'll also bud. Just underneath the ground, you tend to get a ring of buds, or in this case, a root ball that's full of buds. Each one of these is capable of regenerating a new branch. And that's important if you get to an area which is, it's fairly common when we're doing control to find somewhere where somebody's tried to control the plants, or at least knock them back by cutting them. They've cut them and the plant hasn't been killed, and so it's just regenerated, and instead of one giant stem and a bush that's easy to get to and introduce chemical to, you get these kind of dense, very dense covers of multi-stemmed plants. It's difficult to access, and it's also presents a problem with distributing the chemical around the plant. So we'll come on to the different techniques. As I say, we've got quite a toolbox of different techniques that's been honed over the years. There's an awful lot of expertise out there. We're just one of many people who are doing this kind of work. But we'll share, I'll share our experiences and invite anyone who's experienced to share theirs as well. And I think together we can hone these techniques to the point where we can become much more efficient with the limited resources that we do have when we're trying to control these. Our favourite technique, has to be said, is stem injection, or drill and drop as we like to call it. There's Rob Dewey, you heard from earlier, stem injecting a plant. And there's the chemical taking effect on the right there. You can see the necrosis in the upper branches as it begins to take effect on the plant. All we use is a cordless drill, cordless battery drill, and a small reservoir of chemical, 25% glyphosate and 75% water, in a small garden applicator. They're often smaller than the one Rob's using there. It's the sort of thing you can get from any DIY or garden shop. And you use perhaps a small saw and a small hammer just to access the plants. It's very suitable for medium to large bushes, and it always helps if the bushes haven't been treated, haven't been cut before, and they haven't thrown out lots of stems which make them difficult to access. And here's the stem injection taking place. You just drill a small 2 centimetre reservoir into the stem of the plant as low as you can on the plant and below the bottom branches. Some of the bigger trees, basically, you need to probably inject a little bit higher on the tree as well and get that distributed. Sometimes with these really dense patches, you need to get in there. So we'll use chainsaws or hand saws to cut avenues through these big infestations, really big dense infestations. And you can get through an awful lot of ground with just people and drills. No chainsaws needed, apart from cutting these little avenues. Now, the reasons we favour stem injection are many. It's extremely effective. We've had on one visit, the first visit, up to 99% kill rate in the first trip. It means that when we go back in to follow this treatment up, there's very little to do. So it's a very efficient way of doing it. There's a very low risk. It's very targeted. There's minimal risk of collateral damage. You're not harming the plants and the habitats around it, or any animals that might be there, otters or amphibians. What I was saying then. Yes, the glyphosate itself does actually biodegrade within the plant, so it's not escaping from the plant into the environment. It takes very little equipment, and it only takes a few people. It's not very labour intensive, really. Myself and Shani, who's pictured there, we've got through 1 kilometre of a rhododendron forest that looked like this, just 2 of us. So it's very efficient. The ground, the disturbance to the ground is quite minimal. So you're not creating a great big open seed bed for infestation, as you would if you cut your way in and removed all those rhododendron. The dead plants that are still stood standing there give some protection for the forest to regenerate. So seedlings and ground flora are in some ways protected from herbivores, and it does aid in forest regeneration. It may also be, but as you lose the canopy of rhododendrons quite slowly, it might be that the gradual increase in sunlight and the gradual loss of humidity might also protect some of the bryophytes that exist there, because we are talking about Western oak woods, Celtic rainforests. Here we have some more successes. This is back to the bird hide Peter mentioned earlier. That should be Loch Marie you're looking at there. This is by Loch Marie Hotel in Taladale. This bird hide was only put up, I think, something like 25 years before. And you are meant to be looking at the black-throated divers on the loch. And once we've gone back in, we'll probably cut that back, and that bird hide might be usable again. You can also use it along water bodies. Obviously, the last thing you want to do is start getting noxious chemicals like glyphosate into water bodies. And you're also working in quite wet areas. So a very targeted application of this herbicide is, something that's to be desired. Also, if you're manually pulling out plants along water bodies, you do need to be quite mindful in particular of just how much you're eroding the banks. This picture, it's not a great picture, but it does show that's quite a small rhododendron seedling that was pulled up manually. And you can possibly see from the photograph, that's pulled up a great big chunk of earth. So if you've got quite a heavy infestation of rhododendrons along the riverbank and you're pulling these things out, you've got to worry about silt pollution. You've also got to worry about undermining the bank. It is unsightly, the dead plants. You need to be mindful of fire risk as well. That's something that every operative needs to consider, especially around habitation. And this is back to Morag's garden, Rob mentioned earlier. And what you've done is we've stem injected that great big hedge there. And we've gone back in after that, or the NTS have gone back in, they've chainsawed all of this down and opened the area up for the gardeners. Because it distributes the chemicals so well around the plant, stem injection, we sometimes will do this before we cut the plants. And it's another technique I'll go into about stump treatment, but it's often better to inject the plant before you cut these back to stumps, just so you've ensured a good kill rate. And that's, I think you've seen this picture before, but that's it after clearing. So that will tidy up quite well. You can see there's a few rhododendron plants clinging onto life there. This just rams home the importance of follow-up to everything you do. We don't really consider that we've eradicated an infestation until several years after. We're talking about landscape scale before you even could start talking about eradication. Constant monitoring, and that's something that will probably be touched upon with when we're talking about volunteers and working along with communities and partnerships.
Hi, Eamon, just 5 minutes to go.
Okay, there's other stem treatments available. People use all kinds of things, bill hooks, chainsaws, just to expose the cambium of the plants and get the chemical in there. That's our favourite technique, so I've probably spent quite a long time on that. Other techniques, very simple, grubbing up, pulling up the plants physically. Need to be mindful of making sure that all the root stock is up as well, because otherwise it will just regenerate. You need to be careful of your back as well. Also, it's very labour intensive. A small field like this, sometimes the roots can be extremely stubborn, and each one of these plants will take a lot of grubbing up. Can be very labour intensive. If you get dense complex patches like this, you need to consider other techniques if it's going to take too long and you don't have the resources for stem treatment. There is stump treatment available, which is cutting the plants first, and then you can see they've drilled holes and injected the chemical that way. Some people will paint the stumps as well. It clears an area very quickly, and you can make some good progress. It does have the problem with, for some reason, when you do cut rhododendrons back to the stumps, you do tend to get an awful lot of regeneration. Not quite sure why this should be so, but it does show that sometimes it would be better to kill the plant before you cut it. This is very common for stump treated areas for them to regenerate like this. You need skilled operatives, obviously, and wielding chainsaws on steep and difficult ground is sometimes not a great mixture. It takes a lot of skill and it's potentially dangerous. It's also very labour intensive. Lever and mulch, not used it myself. It's quite hard work by the looks of it. I think that's Donald and Gordon. Again, that's a good way of manual techniques for big plants. It has been used. We do have very limited resources, so we need to worry about just how labour intensive some techniques are. Another reason why we tend to favour stem injection. And spraying, this is something we've, to be honest, we do avoid wherever possible. I did buy a very expensive knapsack sprayer and it's just sat in my shed ever since. You can see the collateral damage from spraying one small bush, and that is getting out into quite wet areas. And we just wanted to touch upon plant swap. This is another one we call part of our toolkit, just because this is a way we are resorting to bribery for homeowners to plant replacement plants. Rob talked about it earlier. The problem with that, of course, is a lot of people use Rhododendron ponticum as shelter belts. So we're working through different ways of actually replacing these shelter belts without exposing people's gardens and homes to excessive amounts of wind, and to persuade them to join in. So there are a number of native plants that we'd like to consider for replacing these hedges, and different techniques to do it without actually exposing people's gardens and actually protecting their gardens while we're replacing the plants. It's a very gradual hearts and mind thing, and it's something that all operatives are looking into. And that's me. Sorry, it was very brief. It was a bit of a whistle stop to it, and I'm hopefully quite sure there'll be quite a lot of questions. And thanks for listening.